Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Sell More Book Show, episode 545. I'm Brian Cohen from Best Page Forward, joined by best-selling thriller and romance author, as well as a former spy, Cindy Dees. Cindy, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. So I'm very happy. We met at the same conference I met the wonderful Matt Dinneman at last year, Pacific Northwest Writers Association, and we were at the speaker dinner. And you were the center of attention. I tell you, you have all these great stories from being in the Air Force, from being a spy, and from writing over 100 novels. It's you kind of cringed at me saying you were the center of attention. You don't feel like it, or
Well, I don't like being the center of attention. And once people get me going on war stories, then they tend to just keep pumping me for more. And, it's like everyone else is really interesting too. I'd like to hear about their lives as well. So,
It's tough. It's tough when you're just the most interesting woman in the world.
well,
Um,
hardly.
but I mean, you you got into writing obviously in the midst of all of that. You've written over 100 on the thriller side. I know there's more on the romance side. Uh, what do you like the most about continuing to just keep putting out novels out into the world, continue connecting with more and more readers?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I write the stories because they're banging around in my head. And if I didn't write them down, I think they might make me a little crazier than I already am. And, I've long said I'll stop writing when I don't have any more stories to tell.
Yeah.
But the world is just such an interesting and endlessly fascinating place to me. I'm not even close to running out of stories to talk about yet. So,
Oh,
uh,
I love that. I'm so glad. And we're going to talk about tropes. We're going to talk
yep,
about all sorts of stuff today.
you bet.
So I'm really excited to pick your brain on all of that. Um, I have a webinar this week for those of you listening on hidden Amazon ad spend and how to stop it. You'd think Amazon might have told everyone, hey, we're going to start putting some ads on Pinterest and BuzzFeed for you. But they didn't really. And so we figured out that those don't serve quite as well to the reader community. And so we have a few tips and tricks. Link will be in the show notes. So go check that out. Thursday with an encore on Saturday. For those of you listening in the future, that's Thursday, the 19th of September, 2024. And then the Saturday encore on the 21st. So this question of the week from a couple weeks ago, Cindy, I'm going to ask you this because obviously you write a little bit of nonfiction there on the side of your fiction.
Mhm.
But we asked our listeners, if you write fiction, when would you consider writing nonfiction? If you write nonfiction, when would you consider writing fiction? Brian Scott Paul said, I write sci-fi, but I'd also consider publishing a collection of nonfiction articles I've written for my newsletter with sci-fi criticism, science fact, and opinion pieces. Shane Kowaliak, I'm sorry, Shane, said, I decide what to write about based on what my goals are at the time. I wanted to learn about publishing, so I published a poetry book. I wanted to publish a book for my daughter, children's picture book. Now I want to support my day work, so I'm writing nonfiction. And then Jeffrey's book said, I write nonfiction when it comes about organically. I worked on prompts on social media with a community, then compiled them once we had enough. No reason to force nonfiction when there may or may not be a need for readership. Cindy, we'll talk about this more soon, but you have these great prompts on, you have these great books on tropes.
Mhm.
Why did you decide to write nonfiction?
Well, primarily because I was bullied into it by a friend who said, there's not a good book out there on tropes and you need to write one. And since he made that comment, several other books have come out about tropes in general. And what I found was I had taught writing for 7 years at a major university. I taught novel
Mm-hmm.
writing, and tropes are a dirty word among writers, and
Sure.
they are wildly misunderstood. And the more I dug into them and I tried to de bad child them with my students, the more I realized that there was really a need for somebody to write down what they actually are and why they're actually powerful and important for writers. And um, so the act of me griping at a friend of, nobody understands tropes and they're the bastard child of the industry and they really shouldn't be. And then him saying, you should write a book about it. And then the pandemic happened and, then I had nothing to do but stare at my four walls, and
Yes.
the first trope book came about. And now it's turned into a
Nice.
beast. I've got, I don't know, 18 or 20 of them planned so far. And
Mhm.
4 are done and the 5th one is on the verge of being done. And I don't know what I've gotten myself into. I think it's taking over my life.
Hey, but congrats. I mean, like, that's awesome that you took up that mantle. And I wonder if there was going to be a Family Feud a survey, if bullying would be in the top 10 reasons of why a book was written. It could be. We could
Yeah.
say bullying and or needling from friends.
Yeah. I wrote my first novel on a $1 bet with my mother. I told her I could write a better book than an author, a famous author who's now passed away. And I had read the book and flung it at her and said, what a piece of trash. And I can write something better. And she dared me. And that would be my answer, is I might be a
Yeah.
little bit competitive and, was bet a buck that I couldn't.
I am highly competitive too, so I understand the feeling. Oh, you don't think I can do this, huh?
Oh, yeah? I'll show
Oh,
you. Exactly.
I love it. I love it. And folks, you can answer the question of the week over at the Sell More Book Show After Party Facebook group. Let's get into the top story of the week. Very appropriately, strengthened story with tropes. Quote, think of story tropes as a storytelling pattern, says Jamie Gold, the resident writing coach for writers helping writers. Some patterns are big and can encompass the entire story, like coming of age, and some patterns are smaller and play out over a scene or two, like a double cross, end quote. Every genre of story uses tropes because at their heart, they are merely common themes or patterns. We can't avoid using them, nor should we, and we shouldn't always try to subvert them either. We can look at what tropes can offer us as shortcuts. Quote, tropes and their patterns tap into universal experiences and emotions, says Gold. Tropes can help readers instantly grasp complex relationships, emotional flips, and storytelling turns, end quote. You might think of tropes as a weakness, but by using tropes as a familiar starting point, you have more room in your book to show what your characters have to offer beyond the basic starting point. Quote, tropes are shortcuts for getting readers to understand and or relate to the situation because they recognize the pattern. End quote. Cindy, I don't know if Jamie's read your books, but how closely does this hew to what you think about tropes?
Well, Jamie's exactly right. And I've long followed her writing advice, and she's really good, knows her stuff. And I would only add one thing to it,
Yeah.
because she's precisely, I love her definition of them as a pattern. That's a good way of thinking of them. It's a
Yeah.
beginning, a middle, and an end that your reader expects. And as soon as you introduce a certain type of beginning in a story, then the reader's going to expect certain outcomes. So if somebody is kidnapped on page 1, your reader expects them to be in jeopardy, for somebody to try to rescue them, for there to be failed rescue attempts. And then by the end of the story, that person is rescued.
Right.
And alive or dead, they're rescued.
Right.
And if you introduce somebody who's kidnapped on page 1 and then never rescue them, your reader's going to throw your book against a wall and write you lousy reviews and tell everyone they know that you're a terrible writer. And that's because you broke the promise of that well-known pattern, that well-known trope. And so one of the most important reasons to use tropes, besides what Jamie talks about as a shortcut, and they help you, craft stories more quickly and more easily, is readers expect them and look for them. And if you don't deliver, the readers are going to be super mad. But then there's a deeper reason, and I would point at a nonfiction writer named Lisa Cron. Her name is
Mhm.
spelled Cron, and she wrote a book um, called Wired for Story. And
Mm.
she spends an entire book explaining this notion of human beings are hardwired to learn through stories. And we would much rather read about a character experiencing a scary situation. And for all the romance readers and writers out there, by the way, falling in love is very scary. So
Mhm.
we would rather read about a scary situation and learn vicariously through the experiences of these fictional characters than have to experience it ourselves. And over eons of becoming humans and learning speech and learning to communicate with our fellow cavemen, we discovered that those of us who can learn by hearing a story without having to experience something ourselves survive better. And we've literally genetically selected for eons to learn very, very well from hearing other people tell stories. And so when you combine this notion of we learn from stories with these classic patterns of stories, you get the reason that tropes are incredibly important, and readers glom to them like nobody's business.
That makes total sense. And something that a word that you use that resonates with me because I tell it to my audience all the time, the word expect.
Hmm.
The expectations. A tip I give my listeners on a regular basis is every time you write a book, you need the goal of getting 25 to 30% closer to what readers' expectations are.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to keep getting better at that over time. You can't expect you're suddenly a perfect trope writer right off the bat. But if you keep doing that with every book and every series that you write, you are bound to start connecting with readers on that deeper level of what they're actually expecting in that subgenre.
Okay, so if you're talking about expectations, then how do you feel when writers turn expectations on their heads?
So, this is one of those things. I think that there are certain personality types. I think of you, Enneagram 8s, and others who just love coming up with your own thing. You
Hmm.
love doing your own thing, and you feel weird if you don't do your own thing. But you can choose what things you are going to do your own thing with.
Hmm.
When it comes to reader expectations, don't mess with their expectations. As Cindy just explained so eloquently, they aren't quite going to like that. They're going to throw the book at the wall. But what can you subvert? My favorite thing that I think any Enneagram 8 or any contrarian thinkers out there can subvert is what the author's life needs to be. You do not need to live your author life the way some guru says or some teacher says or how the person who's doing well is doing. You can write from a pool. You can write from being on the road in an RV. You can write and publish and market and do all these things in exactly the way you want to do. But the writing is not necessarily something you want to subvert in a big way. If you're going to subvert something in the writing, though,
Interesting.
subvert something that readers don't have a deep expectation for. Like
Mhm.
you brought up with the kidnapping, Cindy. Yes, kidnapper needs to get the kidnappee needs to get the rescue attempts that don't work and needs to get rescued at the end. But could the kidnappee be kind of quirky and have some interesting stuff about them from a character point perspective? Sure, as long as the things that have to happen in the story for readers to feel their expectations met happen, there might be some wiggle room on some other things that they aren't as invested in having to be a certain way. So those are the two ways I'd recommend subverting expectations.
That's helpful.
Oh,
I would
good.
suggest too that you can also do things like the kidnappee hired the kidnapper to kidnap them. That's
Mm-hmm.
something very unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can play around with, is the kidnapping real?
Right.
And, the kidnappee who said, all right, thanks, that's been enough now, let me go. And the kidnapper's, oh, no, no, but I want the
Ah.
ransom. You can
Mm-hmm.
play with subverting back and forth the expectations of how they'll behave. And lots of people, when they hear the word trope, think of cliches.
Right.
And that's what readers and the general public usually mean when they talk about, oh, a book is very tropey. What they mean is it's very cliche. And I'm very quick to say a story pattern is only cliche if you're a bad writer. And um, so the trick is just don't fall into old, tired, overused, ground in patterns of character types. I like your idea. I love your idea of talking about give characters quirks, make them a little bit different. Um,
Mm.
the madam with the heart of gold, the hard-boiled PI that drinks too much and chain smokes and whose secretary has always been in love with him and he's not aware of it. I mean, they're just so expected.
Right.
And so if you can just do something a little unexpected in that way, then you can keep with that very expected story.
Yes. No, I love that. That's awesome. All right. So those were kind of our hot potatoes questions. Let's move into the lightning round. So we've got our big Foley sound here, Cindy. Can you do a
Okay.
lightning sound for us?
All right. Boom. That's a close lightning strike.
Ooh, I love that. I think it woke me up.
Oh,
No, that
okay.
was perfect. So you talked about kind of if we are going to uh not get into cliche territory, we don't use the trope in the 100% exactly the way it's been used.
Right.
Do you think there can be an overused trope though?
For sure. And it's where it gets overused is a book gets popular or very popular, and then everybody jumps on that bandwagon. The publishers jump on the bandwagon. And then you see a million books of that exact type. So
Mm,
you have, Twilight comes out, and then you have millions of vampire romances. You see in the thriller market a book with a retired Navy SEAL who just wants to be left alone and a family member's threatened and he's got to come out and Rambo his way through the world. And in fact, Rambo may be where that started.
mm,
Now there's so many of them. It's just like, could somebody do something different? That when I think of a trope as overused, it's not how the individual author is using it. It's just that so many writers are writing it that you can't escape it and see anything different.
that totally makes sense. Um, I think you've got a question for me.
I do. So you talked a little bit about writers not writing a routine or not writing in a traditional way. Um, how do you suggest that people go about still actually being productive and getting words down on a daily or weekly basis? Do you have some advice for that?
Absolutely. So I think that it is tough when you want to keep switching things up, but you need to have that kind of that butt in chair time. You need to do the things you need to do. I think that you should be open to having fun with yourself. Not every day needs to be exactly the same. It's weird. I work with a lot of 6-figure, 7-figure authors, and sometimes the advice I say is go to a movie, go on a walk, do something. Because if you get, this is where I see people burning out, interestingly
Yeah.
enough. It's the contrarian thinkers that are now feel like they're locked into a cubicle and they start to sabotage their own business.
Yep.
And so the way you avoid that is by don't force yourself in the cubicle. Let yourself have certain milestones you want to meet, maybe not even on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis, but give yourself freedom. If you're
Yeah.
not the I need to sit in this chair at this time kind of person, then sit in any chair, but try to get the same time per day. Or if you're not wanting to hit a certain number of words and you just want to do it on a weekly basis, that's fine. Just know the general, I'm going to do this in a 3-hour range rather than I have to do it at this specific time. I'm someone who needs a little bit of freedom too. After a few months of the same routine, I get sick of it. And so give yourself some space to accomplish what you need to do, but enough restrictions so that you actually do it, but in your own unique way.
That's really good advice. And for what it's worth, I can't write in the same place every day either. I'm somebody, and I've got about 5 different coffee shops in the area around me that I'll rotate between. And I don't know about you, but one of my problems is people want to talk to me. And so
Uh-huh.
I have a big, hairy set of earphones that I wear. And I just pretend I can't hear people. And when I really want to be left alone to write, I just slap those things on, and I may or may not be playing any music. Um, so
That's
also that's
smart.
another thing. If you're out in public or your family won't leave you alone, get a big, like deafening looking set of headphones.
I love that. I love that. It's like your own personal keep out sign.
I actually learned that from Shonda Rhimes.
Oh,
When
lovely.
her first TV show hit, she still had to write, but there were a lot of people tugging at her and a lot of questions. And even in her office, she couldn't write in her office because people would come in and interrupt her. And she learned to just slap on the headphones, and she would blast music in hers. And she found over a period of several months, whenever she put them on and blasted music, her brain just clicked into writing mode because that
Mm,
became her trigger of you're in writing mode now.
I
Um,
love Shonda Rhimes. She's
yeah,
great.
brilliant woman, brilliant.
So, when we first met, you regaled me in the room with the tales of your former life as a part time spy. How often would you say you use your spy experiences in your books?
Oh, in the books fairly frequently. And I've written about individual experiences I've had. Um, I helped a Russian prototype fighter jet defect 1,000 years ago, and that showed up in one of my books. Um, I've written about KGB officers that are similar to KGB officers I've met. So some of it comes through. Um, a lot of it I make up just because it has to serve the story.
Sure.
So, I just take my own training and do my best to make it sound real. And again, real isn't what matters. Plausible is what matters. It's right up there for
Mm,
me. You said your word is expectations. My word is plausible. Doesn't have to
oh,
be
I love
real. It
that.
just has to be believable.
Nice. Nice. Awesome. I think you've got a question for me.
I do. Um, so speaking of plausible and real, um, there are so many rabbit holes and resources that authors can go down nowadays, trying to research their books or learn how to write or learn how to market. What do you think stops authors if all of these resources are available? Why isn't every author successful? What do you think is holding people back?
Well, I think that when an author sees this world of self-publishing and teaching and everything, it's a little different than maybe when we started. There's just so many resources at a moment's uh reach, and it is hard to know, well, if I'm supposed to do this the right way, and there's a lot of people out there who are trying to do this the right way. uh they can be paralyzed by this. My wife's actually a right way person. I want to make sure
Oh,
I do this
yeah.
the right way, but there isn't a right way because everyone does this a little bit differently. And so I think you have to take a little bit on faith. You have to say, look, there are certain things that you're going to stumble through and determine, yes, this worked for me and this didn't work for me. And you are going to have to work through the idea that there is no perfect method. There is no one perfect way up the mountain. And so
Yeah.
you are going to have to struggle in order to find your best way that works for you, which will evolve over time. So don't worry about getting it exactly right, because it is going to come with struggle, time,
Yeah.
iteration, and eventually you'll get what's perfect for you.
Yeah, that's actually really great advice. Although on the subject of mountains, I have to say, lots of people look at my career and go, wow, you've had a lot of success. And, hey, you got to the top of the mountain. What does it look like up there? And the answer is there's another mountain just behind it that I'm standing at the foot of and working at climbing at that one. And the mountain I'm on now is tall enough that I can see there's a whole range of mountains behind the mountain I'm climbing next, that there's no such thing as getting to the top of that mountain. And I always tell people, if you don't like climbing mountains, this is not the right career for you.
I've never
If you're
heard
not
that
prepared
way.
to keep learning your entire career and keep working to get better and keep kind of struggling to figure out a better way to do it, get out now, because you're just
Mm,
headed for a lot of stress.
right. Ah, I love the way you put that. That's awesome. It's almost like you're a writer or something. Um, so last question.
Okay.
So your Helen Warwick thriller series has made progress toward being a Netflix series. Uh, what has that process felt like to you as you sold those rights and moved closer to the show as a reality?
Well,
Uh,
I can tell you, if I thought publishing was slow, my goodness, TV is slower. Now, part of that is the pandemic. Part of that is the lengthy writer's strike that just happened that really slowed down everything. And the industry has been really slow to kind of grind back into gear and get rolling again
yeah.
post strike. And there's lots of different reasons for that. And I'm not sure I'm expert enough to name them all. But oh, baby, has it been a slow process. Um, and it, I think the best way to describe the process is when a film agent came on board the deal to help my literary agent, and she gave me probably the single wisest pieces of advice, which is you're going to look at the ducks. And they're just going to appear to be very slowly gliding around in circles on the pond, doing absolutely nothing. And she said, I swear to you, they are paddling furiously beneath the surface, and you're just not going to see a lot of that. And
Mm,
so it's now become pretty common every 6 months or so for me to grab one of my agents and go, I need to know what the ducks are doing. Please tell me they're
mm-hmm.
still paddling and they're not dead and just floating around in the water dead. And, they'll go, no, no, the lawyers are arguing over XYZ and they've been at it for 6 months. And, or, oh, this element of production it's happening. It's just going slow. And so from the writer's perspective, there's a lot that happens that you don't see. And
Mm-hmm.
you just have to accept that you don't control it. And particularly if writers are coming out of indie publishing, where they control every detail of the process, it's a jolt to have so much of it completely above your pay grade. And the TV industry also has a lot of non-disclosure agreements. Everyone makes everyone else sign them. And so a lot is happening and nobody will talk to you much about it. And you just have to accept the fact that you're never going to know everything. And so it's been a real mental shift.
Yeah.
Um, and I encourage anyone who gets into the TV and film world to immediately find other people that are already there who can just not necessarily give them advice, but assure them that they're not losing their own minds.
I think it's good to have someone like that in any part of your life.
For
Absolutely.
sure. For
Um,
sure.
but that is really good advice from that film agent. That's gonna stick with me. The
Yeah.
paddling ducks.
Yeah. They're
Um,
paddling. You just can't see it.
yeah.
And every now and then, you want to lift it out of the water and go, yep, feet are still flopping. And then you can put it back in the water and, let it go. But that's been a big shock.
Yeah.
Because, and even coming out of traditional publishing, I thought, oh, pshaw, I'll be good at this waiting game. I wasn't prepared for the TV, and stuff is moving forward. I mean, there is progress happening, and you
Hmm.
know, you think you're getting close, and they'll say, "Oh, soon," and it's like, well, is soon 2 weeks or 6 months or 2 years? What does soon mean?
Hmm. But
And
hey, I will say, a few weeks after Matt Dinneman was on the show, his deal finally got signed. So
well, and my deal's been
maybe it'll be the
signed
good
for a couple of
launch.
years. Yeah,
Right.
but the thing is when does principal photography begin? When does it actually begin shooting?
Sure.
And the
Sure.
other
Sure.
the other big milestone you watch for is the announcement. And the official announcement that a show is happening will happen usually only days before filming begins.
Hmm.
And
Right.
part of that is because the actors will move in and move out of projects. They want to
Hmm.
keep working. And so if they've agreed to do project B, but they're still finishing up project A, and project A runs long and they go into reshoots and they end up having to do voiceovers or whatever. And project B is ready to go and the actor's not done with project A, then the actor's kicked off of project B and they'll get somebody else that can go
Right.
that And I didn't realize that the projects don't wait around for the actors and the actors don't wait around for the projects. And so they're not going to come out and say, oh, big actor X is, going to star in this show unless they know, okay, we're a couple of days from starting shooting. They're actually on set rehearsing. The cameras are lined up and plugged in and we're ready to, turn the lights on.
Right.
And so announcements are the other really big thing. Signing the deal is nice, but it's the announcement that matters.
Right.
And
Right,
so
right, right.
I've got deals signed and we're just waiting on the announcements and have been waiting a long time.
Well, Matt got an announcement
It's
of a couple
amazing.
names,
That's
so
exciting. That means
hopefully,
he's really close.
we'll
Good.
be the good luck charm for you
Yeah.
here.
Hey, I would love it if I got an announcement in the next week or two. I hope you're I'll, rub your head there.
Exactly. Please do.
Good
Please
luck.
do. Awesome, Cindy. Well, we need a question of the week here to ask our listeners to get them thinking. What would you like to ask them today?
Well, this is a deep one. And if you'll allow me about 15 seconds to set it up, I was diagnosed with cancer, I don't know, 9 years ago. I'm fine now. But when you're diagnosed, there's about a week of further testing when they tell you how serious it is and what kind you have and what kind of treatment you need. And you spend that week not knowing if this is going to be a tiny blip on the radar of your life or you're dying. And
Right.
I had just turned in a book and was getting ready to start writing a new book. And this is the question that flashed into my brain in neon lights and has completely transformed my career. And that is, if you only have one book left in you, is that the book you're writing now? And as soon as I started asking myself that question before I chose every single project I write, once I started doing that, my career absolutely blew up, because I will only write a book if it is the one book I would write. So that's the one I'm going to throw out to everybody. What is that book and are you writing it now? And of course, the follow-up question is, if not, why not?
I love that. So you can answer that
Yeah,
wonderful
I'll look
deep
forward to hearing what
question of the
everybody's
week.
one book is.
Yeah, over at the Sell More Book Show After Party Facebook group or at sellmorebookshow.com. You can go check out Cindy Dees' fiction and books for authors at cindydees.com. Cindy, it was a delight to have you here today.
It was great
Thank
seeing you again. We need to do this more often.
We're going to. We're gonna have next week's episode here too. But I agree. I would love to see you. We'll have to set this up sometime.
Cool.
Awesome. But a big thank you to Cindy, and we'll be back next week with Cindy one more time. So for those of you listening, have a great week of book selling, everybody. For Cindy, I'm Brian, and we will talk to you next week for episode 546. Bye.
Bye.